Film photography has a lot of different things to it that can be hard to understand, but for color photography at least, there's two main types of film. The first one we're going to talk about is color negative film. Color negative film shows up kind of like this when you take the picture. After being run through its chemical baths for developing, the film looks something to the likes of this. Then it's taken, scanned, and flipped with either editing software or projected onto photo paper. The other main type we're looking at and what the video is about is color positive film. Color positive film comes out how you took the picture. When you take the film strip out of the holder and shine light through it, it looks exactly like the picture you took. And when you scan it, you don't have to flip it to a negative image. There are many reasons that people like slide film, but I think one of the ones that nobody really wants to admit but is true is it just looks cool. When you take the negatives out of a sleeve for color negative film, you kind of can't tell what's going on. But when you look at slide film, it's kind of trippy. You shine light through it, it looks pretty cool. But also photos come out different, so that's probably a real reason right there. However, if you walk into any big box retailer and try to buy film, most of what you're going to find is going to be color negative film because, well, it's cheaper and a lot easier to find a place that develops it. Now, this is a horrible example because the image was taken on Cinestill 800T, which is color negative. I'm only 19, but I've shot many different kinds of film in my life. Most of them were color, with only one being black and white. But none of them were color positive films. All of them were color negative films. I'd never touched slide film until now. Film has also gotten more expensive because while it's gotten popular, it's an ever-dwindling list of manufacturers who are making it still. Nowadays, at least in the US, pretty much any color film you're going to be able to buy new that isn't expired is going to be made by Kodak. You were able to get Fujifilm Superior 400 up until recently. However, that packaging has now changed. It just says Fujifilm 400 and it says it's made in the USA instead of Japan. The only film factory that's color that I can think of in the United States, or at least that I could find that isn't an indie operation or something else, is Kodak. So they pretty much have everything to do with color film now. All those factors together made it appealing for me to look into bulk loading because it's cheaper. Or bulk rolling. I've heard it called both things, but if you look up bulk loading film, sometimes you'll find stuff about fitness and then it's not what you're looking for. So I looked into what bulk films I could find in the United States that are color, and to my horror, all of them had a remjet layer that would have had to be removed with a different film process than what any lab around me offered. I don't want to shoot black and white, so the next best thing I could think of was go on eBay and get some expired film, and that's exactly what I did. This wonderful throwback of a box that expired in 1994 is Kodak Ectachrome slide duplicating film. The purpose of this film is to copy off of other slide film. So you would put a piece of slide film that's been developed into a machine, and you would also put this film into a machine, and then it copies what's on that slide onto this. You can do this with just about any film. What makes this slide duplicating film is the ISO. Most film is maybe 50, 150, 200, 400, 500, 800 ISO. This is either 6 or 12 or 8. I found mixed answers, and on this specific version of slide duplicating film with the 5071 number on it, I couldn't figure out the exact number. But either way, it's set to that specific ISO for whatever machine it was meant to go into. Because I don't know what this thing is supposed to be shot at, I'm going to try it a few different ways. In fact, this film isn't even meant to go into a camera. It's solely designed to copy from one slide to another. And that's what makes this kind of fun. I'm going to be cross-processing this and also shooting it in a camera. So it's going to lead for some very interesting results. When I got the film, it came in this box completely sealed, so it had never been opened. Expiration date of 1994, so this dates back to the early 90s, late 80s maybe. It came in this tin here, which was sealed around completely by this friction tape here. So it was partially airtight. Now, when I opened it, I know that I let air into it, and it was probably already breaking down and expired because you can store film in cold and you can push it way past its expiration date and still get good photos out of it. I have some photos that I've shot on expired Superior 400 from the late 90s that came out without a single issue, because it was stored properly and it was stored in a cool, dry place. What I decided to do was to put this in the fridge after I had rolled it into smaller containers because I didn't want it to break down any more than it already had, especially considering it seemed to have been stored in pretty good position, at least in terms of everything excluding temperature. For about $12, I'd also picked up this bulk film loader off of eBay, and I gotta say it works pretty well, except for this. Considering this is something that can be fixed with super glue, I'm not too worried about it, and I paid $12 for it, plus $65 for the film. It's still so much cheaper than buying individual rolls of film, by a long shot. I needed something to put this film on, so I went to the photo lab when I was dropping off some film and asked them for their old film. And I got 18 rolls for like $4, but they didn't really count them, so it's kind of like, we'll just throw a price on it and you grab a bunch. I did. This is what I have now. So I'm just going to pick one at random. Let's say this one here. It's an old canister of Superior 400, it looks like. I'm going to leave this in the canister and let it cool down, or warm up I should say, before I open it, because I don't want condensation forming inside of it and damaging it. The camera that I'm going to be shooting this on is the Sears KS Super. I don't know why I chose this camera, because to be honest, it's kind of terrible for experimenting with film. Don't get me wrong, it's a great camera and it takes awesome pictures, but there's not really many manual settings on this thing, if any at all. While you watch me struggle to load this camera with one hand, I'm going to explain what I mean by that last statement. So, here are all the settings. On the spin wheel you have L for locked, A for auto, X for flash sync, and then B for bulb mode. For the ISO, you can turn a dial and select it, and you can have exposure compensation where you're pushing it 1 or 2 stops. That is it. You have no anything else. You can't just like spin something around and say I want a 30-second exposure. Nope. Camera decides for you, unless you're in bulb mode, and well, it's not very convenient. So out of all of that, the only thing that comes close to a manual exposure setting is the bulb mode, where you hold down the shutter button and it opens and closes as you hold it down for whatever time period. But if you're taking a 30-minute long exposure, you're going to go nuts sitting there holding that thing down. That's why I don't consider this thing to have a manual mode as what most people call it and consider it. It does appear to have an external controller port, so they do sell stuff that hooks up to a remote and then you can program it to take pictures with bulb mode, so I guess it's kind of useful for that. So now that my film is loaded in my camera, I gotta figure out what to shoot. From what I've heard, this slide duplicating film is awesome at night. It is kind of a slow film, being like less than 20 ISO, so it's good for absorbing stuff, and if you want light trails and other stuff, maybe not the greatest, but it takes nice night shots. So I'm going to go out to a parking lot and take some pictures under the lights of my car. I'm also going to take a picture of some bright scenes and kind of mess around with it and figure out what the sweet spot is. All I know is that ISO setting is going to be at 12 because that's the lowest that this camera goes. And if it doesn't work out with this, I'm also going to try with my EOS Rebel, and there's some other stuff I can mess with. But this thing takes awesome night shots and I prefer it for that purpose. So I've got it set up now under 2 different types of lighting. There's mercury vapor, which usually gives a greenish tinge on film, even if it's a coated type like that one, and then there's LEDs. Now these are all, they call them Cree beta LED, or sorry, Rudd lighting beta LEDs or Cree LED ways, depending on the year. But these were some of the earlier LEDs, which also, because of the phosphor used, tend to give a greenish look on film. So we're going to see how that comes out. Probably not going to be the same, seeing as to how this film is expired and of a different type than what I'm used to. Would you look at that? What a surprise. None of the pictures came out. A 30-year-old camera that only has an auto exposure setting, a film that's super slow of an unknown ISO, and a dimly lit parking lot with glare coming from headlights and all the other light sources and nothing in between. Absolutely not a single one of those pictures came out. They gave me back the roll of film. I looked through it like nothing at all. And that was reciprocity error, which we'll talk about later in the video, but you can see me loading up my Canon EOS Rebel as it sands itself across the sidewalk. After that disappointment, I did have the second roll that I tried in the Rebel come back from the lab, and it's a bit better, but that doesn't mean it's good. See, that last roll is what you would call reciprocity error, because if you follow by the regular rules, the way these pictures came out, at the settings that would have shot at, that I estimate based off of how long I counted the shutter staying open, I should have still gotten something out of those photos, but I didn't. And that's because of the concept of what I'm about to poorly explain of reciprocity error. The longer you expose film, the slower it absorbs light. So, if you want to absorb twice the amount of light in, say, a 30-second exposure, you're not going to take a 60-second exposure depending on the film. You might take a 10-minute exposure. I ended up finally getting back the film after it was developed and looked at it for those last photos, and what had happened was it was still greatly underexposed. So I took the manual settings on the Canon and messed with them until I got decent looking photos, if you can call them that. It's better than before, but not quite there, and you can see all the different exposure times. I think this one's 1.4 seconds. Pretty hard to tell with the chalkboard. Knowing this, I kept upping the exposures, and it started to look better, but not quite there yet. Once I got to about 3 seconds, the photos started to become usable. Imagine some sort of 1970s muscle car, and some dude dressed like it, mullet, mustache, jean shorts, whatever. It would look like it was taken in the 80s with this grain quality and color, so the film's good for if I want a vintage looking photo that could look like it was from the 80s. I fear, though, that this film being so deep fried and old in such a low ISO, that reciprocity error affects it in broad daylight, because this is at 6 ISO, double of that. And again, by regular film logic, this photo shouldn't even exist. At 6 ISO, if that last one showed up how it did, at double the speed, or half I should say, it should be washed out, white. You shouldn't be able to tell what's going on. If anything, this image is maybe a bit more grainy and more yellow in tinge, but otherwise, it's there. I think this is an example of that reciprocity error that I've been told about, where it's losing sensitivity as it goes on further. I've taken photos at double the speed on regular film, well, half I should say again, and they don't come out very much at all if it's broad daylight. So, yeah, this film is deep fried, and unfortunately I think I'm hitting a dead end with it because it is still a little bit underexposed in those last photos. I think the lab was bringing them up on their editor quite a bit when they were scanning them, because when I looked at them, it was hard to tell what was going on. So that's a problem, because if I expose it anymore and it would show up like it's supposed to on slide film when you look at the actual film itself after developing, it would turn out like this. I just kept going and going and going, and it's like, I don't know, 9 seconds or 30 seconds, I don't even know anymore. I can't tell what's written on it, but it wasn't getting much better. I was losing quality of the photo even though it was becoming brighter. So I have the choice to either way underexpose the photo and get less grain, or overexpose it and get a lot of grain. I did go back to one of the photos and played with the settings a little bit, and it comes out a little better with the colors, but it's still not right. Then it's back to that image for comparison, so 3 seconds seems like a pretty sweet spot. The only reason that photo looks even more grainy is because it's a screenshot taken inside of an editing program, because I was too lazy to do it the right way. I'm going to take some more shots and play with it more, and we'll see what happens. For now, though, thanks for watching, and I'm trying to grow this channel, so I don't know, like it, share it, subscribe. I really don't know, but just do something. If you could, I'd appreciate it, because I'd like to get something out of this channel one day and turn it into something cool. For now, it's not that great, but if I start to see more interest, my editing will get better for sure. Anyway, thanks for watching.